Well, welcome to the Shepherd Hearted Leader podcast, where we explore topics that help strengthen your ability to care for those under your leadership. Now, today we have Reverend Joe Anderson in the studio, and he is a pastor turned evangelist turned author, and he shares his powerful story in his new book, The Tension of Redemption. And we're going to talk to him about how to persist and follow after God as a shepherd-hearted leader. So, Joe, thank you so much for being here today. We're so glad that you are here on the podcast, and just want to start out, how do you know Nate and how do you know Emmanuel? Like, what's your connection here?
Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Jodi, for having me here. And it's interesting. Somebody asked me about Pastor Nate and my relationship. Like, how did you guys know each other? Did you guys go to school? Did you work together? And I was thinking, how can I explain this? Because we never worked together. We weren't at school together. We never spent more than one day together. And I said, it's kind of like when you have a cousin who lives in another state and you only see each other like once a year at the most. But each time you get back together, you pick up right where you left off, and you feel like you're best friends every time that you are together, and just because you're kindred hearts. And that's how Nate and I have just been through the years. It's like we'd get together and we just go deep right away. So over the last number of years, that's how our relationship has grown. And Emmanuel's been a church that's kind of literally been in my backyard when I lived just a few blocks from the Spring Lake Park campus during some dark years of my life.
Yeah, we'll get into that maybe in a little bit. But I noticed your ministry is called Surrender, and like your Instagram posts or your Instagram handle is Surrender Joe or My Surrender.
Surrender Joe, yep.
I talk about that and how you came up with that. That's kind of a unique name and a little bit maybe unusual. Yeah,
so Surrender Ministries is our nonprofit ministry, and it's just everything has been just the whole concept, the whole idea of surrender has been everything for me, for my wife, and our whole journey. It always comes back to that, like people would say, what's your secret to your marriage surviving the things you've been through? And we just say, surrender to Jesus. What's your secret to recovery and staying sober? And I always say it's not that complicated, but it's surrender to Jesus is where it all begins and ends.
No, that's really good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sense that a lot with the Lord. When I start getting ahead of God, maybe it's like the Lord's like, Jodi, surrender. So I really love that you picked that name. Let's talk about where it all began for you and the Lord. How did you come to faith? How did you know Jesus right at the beginning?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian family, third generation, Assemblies of God on both sides, my mom and dad's side. So there was never a time where I didn't feel God's presence, just in church, Sunday school, Sunday church, choir in the afternoon on Sundays and Sunday night and Wednesday. So that was just my whole life. Grew up in Bloomington, going to Bloomington Assembly, Cedar Valley Church, and loved it. I was very involved in youth group. I gave my heart to the Lord at a young age, filled with the Spirit when I was 13, called to ministry shortly thereafter. I think I was about 15 years old. And just this sense that a few of my uncles were pastors too, and I really looked up to them, and I was like, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I felt called to do.
And maybe touch a little bit more on that. How did you feel called to ministry?
It was at a youth convention, and there was an altar time, and I was praying at the altar, and one of my youth pastor at the time, he came up just to pray with me, and he said, what's on your heart? Because I was emotional, and I said, I feel like I want to be a pastor, but I don't know if that's from me or from God. And he talked me through it, and he said, I see that in you. And it was just the power of someone confirming that in my life, that you've got that calling. And it just resonated with me. And then from that point on, I let people know I was going to be a pastor. And in school, I led Bible studies in high school. Oh, wow. My friends called me the Rev or Preacher Joe. And just everyone knew I was going to be a pastor. It was that was the trajectory of my life. That's what I was headed towards all through junior high and high school.
And so then after you graduated from high school, how did you pursue ministry?
Yeah, so it was an interesting time for me. It's why I'm really passionate about young adults as well, because I think in the church, we see this over and over again where people are raised in the church, they're solid in the youth group, and they have a good discipleship and accountability. And then when friends kind of scatter to different schools and some of that structure leaves us or we leave it, a lot of times people can fall away. And that was my story. It was really under the radar because I got out. I wanted to go to, I went to a community college for a year to save money. I was going to go to North Central University, but I needed to have the money for school and everything. So I went to community college. It was during that time that I thought, you know what? I've never drank alcohol. I didn't party. I'm going to be a pastor. But right now, what would the harm be if I just kind of sowed my wild oats or just experimented a little bit? And I did what a lot of people do is I was looking at like Bible verses to try and support, like alcohol's not really bad. You know, I was raised where it is bad and it's forbidden, but like, it's okay. You know, Jesus drank wine, or it says, you know, if you have an upset stomach, drink a little wine. You know, I was using all of that to really justify my actions. And I started drinking. And because I was keeping it under wraps and quiet, there was only a couple friends I did that with.
And this was all while you were at Bible college?
No, this was prior to Bible college. So I was at a community college, and I would go out, and because it was pretty concealed, it was like binge drinking.
Oh, wow.
There was no social component. Plus, I was underage. So it was like, if I was going to drink, and there was also that feeling of this is forbidden. So I drank to excess every time right away. And it did something for me. I mean, there is a lot of science about kind of the alcoholic gene and the DNA. And that was something that I think kind of clicked in with me with an addictive personality. I didn't realize it at the time, but I can look back and say like, okay, the tentacles of alcoholism were wrapping around me right away. And on top of that, there was the built-in like shame and guilt that I was lying, that I was misrepresenting myself, that I was being a hypocrite, that I was living kind of a secretive life. And I'd go to church and be like, wow, I was drinking last night and I'm at church and I didn't get struck by lightning. Like nobody knows.
Wow.
And so that kind of built up denial within me and living a lie in a lot of respects. That carried on, and I would try to quit, and I'd go back to it, and I'd go weeks between drinking, was managing it really well, like people weren't finding out about it, no consequences really. And I joined the Air Force, went away for training for that, and the Air National Guard to pay for my schooling. And after a year of that, I went to North Central essentially as a junior. I went to North Central to finish my ministerial degree. And when I went to North Central, I was like, I'm going to Bible college. My drinking days are done. Like I was going to close that door of that period of my life.
I suppose you probably have to sign a covenant.
Yeah, and I also and I knew that within me, I didn't like that guilt. I didn't like that shame. I didn't like the feeling that I had where I liked the alcohol a little too much.
Yep.
And I was seeing some of those things like this isn't the life I want, and it's certainly not being a pastor. I'm not gonna lie and hide that I'm drinking. Yep. That has to stop at some point. So I'm going to North Central. And I really thought that when I signed the admission papers and I walked through those doors, that those habits and addictions would just fall off me, right? Yeah. And there's a saying in recovery: wherever you go, there you are. Because a lot of times people will try to like, I'm going to move to Montana, or I'm going to get a different house, or I'm going to change jobs, because then my addiction will go away. And it's like those problems have a tendency to follow us. And so I went to North Central, met my future wife right away, like right before the start of the school year, because she was a transfer in as well from Michigan. And new students had to be there a few days before for orientation. And so I was there. I saw her walking down the Skyway with some friends, and I saw her, I'm like, she's beautiful. I want to talk to her, and I need to shoot my shot now because the upperclassmen will be coming in a couple of days. So like, I'll never have as good odds as this. I was an opportunist. And so we stopped and we talked, and that's how we met and started dating. And I quickly found out that my alcoholism, my addiction came with me.
And did she know about it?
She didn't know. I kept it real. I was really good at, because I would binge drink and then like pass out and sleep. And again, it wasn't, a lot of times people think an alcoholic is like someone who's pulling out a flask and drinking all day, every day. And that's not, I mean, there are people like that, but this would be like a weekly thing. And I would drink to excess. And it was something that I was trying more and more to not do, because I'm like, wait a minute, now I feel bad. I feel like one of those like fallen ministers who's doing something behind the scenes, and I'm lying to her, I'm lying to my roommates, I'm lying just even through the lie of omission that they don't know this about me.
And when you were doing your binge drinking, is this still you were doing it alone, or did you have friends?
There were some friends that I could always find some people that would, and even at North Central there were some people,
They're not all saved at Bible college?
No, you can find. Well, this is what I tell people is that you can find good people to be around at any college, and you can find bad people to be around. And I was a bad person too, like doing bad things. You can find trouble wherever you're at, and you can find godly things to do wherever you're at too. And so that was continuing on, and I was still more and more, I was trying to quit. And it was scaring me because it's like, oh, I can't. Like I'm telling myself now, I told myself when I go to North Central, I'm going to quit. Now I've got a girlfriend, told myself I was going to quit. Now it's like, okay, next semester, I'm definitely going to quit. Next month, I'm going to quit. It's Monday, I'm going to quit. That was always a good day to say you're going to quit. And those deadlines that I would impose upon myself, they would just come and go. And so I'd look back and be like, man, I have bargained with myself multiple times, and I'm not. And here's the thing. I had, for being 20, I had a pretty successful life. Like I had a pretty good life. Like most things that I set out to accomplish, I was able to do. And so like there were a lot of good things in my life. So now when I have something that's an addiction, it's like, I can't outsmart this.
Oh, wow.
I can't stop. That's a very scary place to be. It's lonely and you're like, what is wrong with me? You get mad at yourself, which then causes you to self-loathe and like sabotage yourself. And then you want to do something to relieve that pain. And then you go right back to the thing that it was hurting you in the first place. For me, it was the alcohol. And probably, one of the things that I learned through that is I would go to the altar and I'd pray. And I'd be like, God, take this from me. Zap me. Like on the count of 3, God. 1, 2, 3, do it. Here I am, zap me. And when that wouldn't happen, like he wouldn't deliver me of that. And I do believe that can happen for people. It didn't happen for me. And really, and that would frustrate me. Like, why doesn't God care about me? Why isn't he removing this from me? Yeah. And I look back on that, and it wasn't a lack of God's power, but it was a lack of my surrender.
Wow.
Because I just wanted him to remove something. I wasn't willing to be open and honest and accountable. I wasn't confessing to anyone.
Nobody knew. You're asking God to take it.
Nobody knew who was like gonna help me. Let's put it that way. That was gonna say like, Joe, you should stop drinking.
They might help get you a 6-pack or something.
Right. And so that was the whole path that I was on. And again, then I graduate Bible college, and I get engaged, and I'm still doing this. And, it's progressing. And that's really how addiction works in people's lives, is it just slowly takes over your life. And even the summer before Jen, when my wife, when she was my fiance at the time, she went back to Michigan the summer before our wedding, because we were getting married in October of 96. And she was going to work and stay with her parents and prepare for the wedding. And I was back here in the Twin Cities working and just drinking like crazy.
Oh, wow.
Because I told myself,
you're going to quit once you get married.
Once I get married, it's over. That's the new deadline, like 4 years later, right? And it's like, I'm going to quit then. So I just need to get it out of my system. Yeah. It's kind of like when someone says, I'm going to start my diet tomorrow, so I'm going to eat half of that pie, that whole pie, because tomorrow's the day, you know? We've all been there in some way, but this was like in a massive, magnified way. And so then I went out to Michigan to get married, and we had huge tragedy on our wedding night. Her dad was shot, and that's a whole story there. And
So let's dive into your book, Tension of Redemption. Did I get it right?
Tension of Redemption. Yep.
You've listed probably at least 8 or 9 pretty key moments in your life in the book. I mean, there's probably even more than that, but maybe just give us an overview of that.
Yeah. So the things that I touch on in the book, and I tried to make it really conversational, kind of like we're talking right now, just sharing, like I would share my testimony with someone if we were having coffee.
I'd say for sure it's hard to put down. Once you start reading. So if you're listening to this podcast and you get the book, make sure you have time because you're going to want to read it.
Yeah, most people read it in 2 days, and they'll say, like, I had to take a break because it gets kind of intense in the middle. It does, but the last chapter is when I really kind of preach at you, So okay. I want to earn. I
haven't gotten to the last chapter.
I want to earn the right to be able to really, preach. But yeah, so the things that we cover in the book that my wife and I have been through is her dad was shot on our wedding night. It was an attempted murder. There's a crazy story with that. We separated 6 months after we got married due to my alcoholism. It was 1 month after I had been credentialed as a minister that I had to turn that in. We separated. My world fell apart. Then I went down the dark path of addiction and alcoholism where I wasn't hiding anything.
And how many years into the addiction was this now? Once it was more open.
Well, so it was 6 months after we got married that everything fell apart. And so it was really, I was kind of on the accelerated course. I'd only been drinking secretly for a few years. And then once we separated, then I was off to the races. Like I turned my back on God, the church, the ministry. And I was like a deep, active alcoholic for 2 years.
Okay.
Because we were separated for almost 3 years, 2 years and 10 months to be exact. And so for 2 years of that, it was bad. It was really bad. I woke up every morning, the first thought I had was suicide.
Oh, wow.
Because I was hopeless. I was hopeless. I was mad at God for what had happened. I was struggling. I'd get up, I'd go to work, and then I'd come home from work and drink until I passed out and do it all over again. And then on the weekends, I'd really drink, because I wasn't working. And when I finally hit a point where I knew I was going to drink myself to death, because I lived with 3 guys. It was almost like a mini fraternity house, heavy drinkers.
Oh, and this is like when you're separated from your wife.
Yep, while we were separated. And actually just a few blocks from Emmanuel Christian Center in Spring Lake Park, ironically. So I would drive by the church a lot and be like, okay, should probably go there.
Was there conviction?
Yeah.
Drawing of the Spirit.
I should have. So I always think about that. Like this past weekend when I preached here, I was like, there's people right around here who are driving by. And but this was a sobering moment, pardon the pun, but my 3 roommates who were heavy drinkers, they came to my room one night and they all had beers in their hands, if you can just see this picture, and they did an intervention on me.
Oh, wow.
They're half drunk and they're like, Joe, we're really worried about you because we all like to drink, but you're drinking to such excess that you don't know this, but we're taking turns in the morning to come and check on you because we think we're going to find you dead.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, you just need to tone it back and kind of drink like we do, and we all want to have fun. And it was kind of almost a comical scene where like they're holding beers and they're trying to talk to me. But that's how bad it was, that they were really worried and concerned for me. And finally got to a point I knew I was going to drink myself to death, kill myself, or somehow get help. So I went to Hazelden Treatment Center thinking that they were going to medically fix me. I really did. I thought, I didn't know anything about the 12 steps of recovery, that it was so in its origin Bible-based. But I thought they were going to like give me a pill or do some kind of I thought I was open for anything, shock therapy.
They're going to answer your prayer. Like you're praying to
they're
God,
going to medically,
fix it.
like this
Maybe
is treatment. Like they're going to give me something.
Yeah.
And when I got there and I started seeing the 12 steps, I'm like, oh, that's right out of the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh, we got morning meditation, which is like devotions. And then there's a speaker that's going to come in and it's on this is like Lake Geneva Bible Camp. And it scared me because I'm like, there's no hope apart from God.
Yep.
And so it was April 17th, 1999. The first day I was there, I got on my knees and I really surrendered to Jesus.
Wow.
And that was the turning point.
Praise the Lord. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just want to ask, the drinking got more out of control like 6 months into your marriage, and it was because of your father-in-law shooting and that kind of thing, or do you want?
Yeah, that's certainly because this was 1996 when we got married and the shooting took place, and we were set to live in the Twin Cities, and so my father and my wife's dad gets shot. They don't catch the person who shot. He got shot
the night of your wedding.
Yeah, it was early the next morning. We got married on a Saturday night. He officiated the wedding. He's a pastor, and early the next morning, an intruder broke in their home. It's a nice, safe community, town of 10,000, Milford, Michigan, kind of an affluent area. They lived on 3 acres of land behind the church. Man cut the phone line, broke into the house, walked right past our wedding gifts and money, wasn't there to steal anything. Went into my wife's parents' bedroom, opened the door, turned on the light. My mother-in-law sees a man wearing a ski mask and holding a 12-gauge shotgun.
Oh, wow. And
they'd just given their oldest daughter away in marriage. And so she just closed her eyes and started praying. And the guy steps forward, leans over her. And my father-in-law like leaned on his side and was just like waking up and put his hand out and was able to say no. But from 2 feet away from the end of the barrel, the man pulled the trigger, shot him in the chest with a 12-gauge slug.
Oh, wow.
Which is, will drop a deer. It blew a softball-sized hole in his chest, out his lower back, through the wall, into the front yard. The police had to actually use a metal detector to find the bullet in the yard and dig it out. Shot him, turned and ran out. Father-in-law, long story short, he survived miraculously. And I detail all this in the book. But as he's recovering, that was tragic and traumatic as it can get. But unlike a car accident or something else, like that guy was still out there and the police didn't know who it was. And so we're living in fear that he's going to come back and try and finish the job. And why did this happen on our wedding night? The police are warning us, like, this guy, we don't think it's a coincidence. It was on the wedding night. He might be coming after you. And so my thought was, let's get out of town. Like, people are getting shot here. Your dad's okay. And my wife was like, she was like, at that point, she wanted to be a daughter more than she wanted to be a wife. Because we were young. We were 22 and 21.
And this is in your first few days of marriage.
Yeah, and we hadn't seen each other. We saw each other. We were apart all summer leading up to our wedding in October. So it was also that kind of like getting acquainted at the wedding. Like, hey, we haven't seen each other for a while. And then, expecting to go on a honeymoon and do what like newly married couples do. And it's funny, not funny, but interesting, because my wife and I, when we talk about the story, now that we've been married almost 28 years, we look back on us and we just feel, we're like, oh, we feel so bad for that couple. Like, we were just so young, and to have that, and like, we needed help. And it wasn't that people weren't trying to help us, but it's just like, oh man, that was a tough way to start. And so she reluctantly came back to the Twin Cities. She cried the whole way, the whole drive back. So our marriage started off terribly. People back then didn't use the term post-traumatic stress disorder. It just wasn't a thing. But we both had it. Something happened in my wife where like her personality changed. She was in shock. She wasn't the same person in those first few months of our marriage. It was just like, she wasn't all there, and she doesn't even remember that time. It was just so shocking to her. And so she'd be on the phone with her parents. She really wanted us to move back to Michigan. I didn't want to move to Michigan. So it was the recipe for disaster. I'd go out and drink behind her back. She wasn't even paying attention to me. So that's all building behind the scenes. But I was doing an internship, and I was getting ready to get credentialed as a minister, and I wanted to get a job at the church I was interning at. Wow. And so we'd go to church and act like everything was okay. And we'd also be like, praise God, her dad survived. And we didn't want to detract from that miracle. So we felt like we can't tell people we're struggling.
And she, at this point, probably didn't even know the level of struggle that was going on.
Oh, no, not at all. But there was like, we would fight, we would argue, and then everything blew up. Like I said, it was 6 months into our marriage. I was in the Air National Guard, like I'd said, and I was gone for training for a weekend. And I ended up drinking with the guys, and they're like, hey, they knew me as like the preacher guy, the pastor who just become a pastor. I got drunk with them. I went to a strip club, and the shame and guilt that I felt over that, because they're like, I could see them look at me. Some of them like, whoa,
like, why are you here?
What's with this? And I got home from that weekend. My wife found a can of chewing tobacco in my jacket.
Okay.
And she confronted me on that. And at that point, I was like, I was so tired of our fighting, and I really wanted out of our marriage. Like, I just wanted out. I was so tired of like lying and our marriage being a lie and the trauma and all this. And I told her everything that I'd been doing.
Wow.
And she's like, I'm done. Like, how could you do this? And it was decided between our pastor and a counselor that we would take like a cooling off period, that she'd go back to Michigan for a couple of weeks. And it ended up being we were separated for almost 3 years
Wow.
during that time.
So then in the book you detail, so now things get hard and the addiction spirals even more out of control, then you're separated. And then you get back together, talk about what happens next.
Yeah. So once I got sober, it was, and I was advised by people in treatment, and a lot of people are like, you need to get a divorce because in some recovery circles, they'll say, you know, your recovery's got to be selfish. It's got to be about you staying sober. And your wife is a trigger for you after what you guys have been through. And so people were advising me, like, you need to get a divorce. Don't get back together with your wife because you'll start drinking again. And it was about a year into my sobriety, and I needed that time just to recover and get focused on the Lord and get discipled back into being a true follower of Jesus. We got back together, and that was 90% my wife, just her being tenacious and stubborn and fighting for our marriage because I was scared. And she graciously, she came back, we got back together, and we didn't have any counseling. It's like after all that time of being apart, we got back together and God resurrected our marriage.
It's amazing.
That's the best way I can describe it. And it was amazing.
So then God resurrects your marriage. Jen is empathetic and loving, and you're leaning into all of it, and God's working in you. And then all of a sudden, you start going into life and things start getting hard again.
Yeah, we're our marriage is restored. We're heavily involved in our church. I'm working through a restoration process to get my credentials back. I get my credentials back as a minister. I'm like, wow, I thought that all these things I thought were gone. I thought my marriage was dead. I thought I was dead. I thought ministry was complete. Yeah, and God's restoring all of this, and then we wanted to start a family, and tragically we went through 3 miscarriages, which was so hard, and that we really struggled during that time with because I think everyone feels this on some level, is almost like there's got to be an equal scale of good and bad, and we're owed a certain amount of good things and then a little bit of trouble too, and so we're kind of almost like, God, look at what we've been through. And we've stayed married, and I'm sober, and we're serving the Lord. You owe us one. We just want to have a baby. How come teenagers can, after one night, get pregnant and everything goes well, and look at us. We're doing good. What more do we need to do? Just give us a baby. And
you're in ministry at this point too.
Yeah, and just feeling why? Why does everything have to be so hard? And of course, the enemy wants to whisper you're cursed. And God hates you, and look, he's messing with you. And having to fight that struggle of and even people kind of looking at us with pity, man, I wouldn't want to be you guys, but again, coming back to that word and that concept of surrender. Yep. And surrender to Jesus has never failed us, ever, because he is always faithful. Even, I think we sometimes think, well, I'll follow God if things turn out good, because that's the way it has to be. And Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. I think if a pastor tweeted that out, they'd be like, oh, I reject that word. That's a negative word. But Jesus said that. He said, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world. And one of the things that we've wanted to share in our testimony is because I think a lot of testimonies get presented of, this was our life. It was really bad. Then we surrendered to Jesus, and now we're walking off into the sunset, and everything's great. No. And you can have a glorious life like that too. And that's not reality.
Yeah, that's not how it's
going to be struggles. There's going to be difficulties. It's not, and a good life following Jesus isn't a life without problems. No. It's that he gets us through that. He carries us through. And many of the blessings in life are coming through those struggles so that we can use those God will use those for our good and for his glory. Yep. And to reach other people.
So then you had 3 miscarriages and then some adoptions.
Yep. And then we were just, again, miraculously led to adopt. And it was just the stories of how that happened, even just financially, it was crazy how God made a way for us to adopt. And we adopted our daughter, and then a year later adopted our son. And then right after that found out we were pregnant, and my wife gave birth to our beautiful baby girl. So we went from 0 kids to 3 babies in 23 months.
All while in ministry.
Yeah. And it was like my wife quit her job to stay home as soon as we adopted our first daughter. And I had taken a massive pay cut to go into ministry.
And where were you ministering at this point? Were you pastoring or were you...
Yeah, so I got, and this is interesting. I think maybe someone needs to hear this because I felt a lot of shame and guilt about my alcoholism. And there was a lot of, there's a lot that happens in a life of addiction that you don't feel good about, right? And especially because of the call of ministry in my life. And I kind of thought, am I damaged goods? And at this time, when I was getting restored with my credentials, I was a little bit older. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be a youth pastor. I can't sing. I'm not administrative.
Checking things out.
I'm not administrative. So like, where's there a place for me in ministry? And ironically, the place that I got into ministry was to be a recovery pastor.
Oh, amazing.
And it was so cool how God took the most shameful part of my life and he turned that actually kept me from ministry originally. Wow. He used that to turn around because I was involved in a recovery group and then became the leader of the recovery group, that was the avenue that I got into full-time ministry. Wow. And I love how God does that. I think you see that in people. That's God's redemption. And that's why, the tension of redemption.
That's good.
Is I think if you look at any church, if you look around, you say, okay, what are the different groups in this church? Okay, there's a financial class in this church. Okay, well, who's leading it? This couple. And you're like, I know that couple has a story about how they had financial struggles and maybe they learned the principle of tithing and stewardship, and now they're passionate about it. So what was a huge weakness for them, God's turned around where now they want to tell everyone about financial freedom. Whoever's leading a recovery group, it's like there's a story there. Or an older couple who's marriage mentors. You just want to go up and go, what's your story? Because at some point, your marriage was on the rocks. And we don't think that because everything looks good now. But so God takes what the enemy meant to destroy us and turns it around, not just for like our good, but to help other people.
I love that.
And that was the story of how I got into ministry.
I think that's so powerful, the power of confession. When we're honest with one another, the Bible says, confess your sins one to another and you'll be healed. Yeah. And I just think as people see the real us and the things that we're challenged with or struggle with or overcome, it can set others free too. We can all experience healing. So then you adopted, then had a child, and then you adopted again.
Yeah, it was years later. And it was ironically our daughter, Jada, who our biological daughter, I think she was 10 years old at this time. So it was quite a while later. My wife and I felt this because we'd done so much with adoption at this point. We were mentoring couples. We probably helped about 100 adoptions take place just in our ministry and counseling people. We were kind of like the go-to people for that. And we sensed that our family wasn't complete, but we just weren't sure how or why. And my daughter, Jada, she would pray at night. She's like, I'm praying that we'll adopt twin baby boys.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, that's cute, And then like a couple months after she was praying that, a friend of ours from a church that we had pastored at, we hadn't seen in a while, sent me a message on Facebook and said, hey, I hope I'm not too bold to say this, but I've been serving at this orphanage in Haiti. And there are twin baby boys here who need to be adopted. And every time I hold them, I feel like they're supposed to be in your family, like they're supposed to be with you guys. And I'm just trying to be obedient and tell this to you. And I was like, I felt the goosebumps. And I'm like showing my wife. And we jump on it right away because we're like, okay, I think this is God. And we started that process. And with our other adoptions, they happened very fast, like record-breaking fast. And this time it went really slow. From when we started the process to when we brought the boys home was almost 3 years. And so there's a lot that happens in those 3 years of development. Brought them home, and shortly after bringing them home, one of the boys was exhibiting reactive attachment disorders. Is the diagnosis, and it's basically if you look at the psychological symptoms of it, it's a fascination with blood, gore, sharp objects, murder, death. And it's usually all directed towards mom. So it's, kids who are in an orphanage many times get really good at bonding. Like, oh, you give me some candy, I'll hug you. Mm-hmm. You put sunglasses on me, I'll smile for a picture. I'll do this. It's real transactional. And really can struggle with attachment, like true love and attachment. And one of our boys, Jimmy, he had that struggle. And associated with that was a huge demonic influence in his life. Unlike anything I'd ever seen in ministry or experienced. I mean, at this point, I'd been a pastor for a number of years. And I'm kind of a natural skeptic. If like someone tells me something like, I had a dream last night that a bald eagle caught on fire and flew into American flag, and that means I'm like, oh, maybe,
like, okay, we'll see how this goes.
Let's see. Let's pray about that. Like I'm kind of like, all right, I want to see some proof. I'm not just going to take someone's word for it. And if somebody would have told me what I saw firsthand, I got to be honest, I wouldn't have believed them. Yep. It was unbelievable. And once that started, it set us off on a course where it was like living in a haunted house for over 2 years. And we tried everything. We threw everything at it with like a multi-layered approach, like every facet, like psychologically, spiritually, physically. We had him at the Mayo Clinic, the psychiatric, juvenile psychiatric department there for a week.
I remember watching, like as another minister in the district, watching from a distance. We watched you guys go through that. That was tough years. It
was insane. And I'm pastoring during this time, and we have 5 kids. And so it was, we did everything. Like we went to like, fortunately the Twin Cities is like one of the best attachment centers for reactive attachment disorder is there. And we were going there weekly. We were going to every deliverance ministry, every missionary, even to the point, and I write in detail about this in the book, we were told at one point by the counselor we were going to, she's like, I know somebody who knows somebody who can put you in contact with the one Catholic priest in this area who's authorized to do the rite of exorcism.
Oh, wow.
And it's a charismatic, spirit-filled priest. She's like, I don't even know his name. It's really secretive, and I have to, as a psychologist, write a letter. Like, you can't just make an appointment. And I'm like, and if someone would have told me years before, Joe, you're going to go to a Catholic priest with your son for an exorcism, I'd be like, no way, never. Yeah. I'm an evangelical. I'm a Pentecostal. Like, why would we do that? And I'm like, sure, sign me up. Give me,
anything.
And we did that, and it was such a weird process to go through. But and I went 13 months in a row with my son to that.
Wow.
And it came to a point where I would take him, but we still have our other 4 kids to take care of. And so there were times where my wife and I, our conversation was like, she's like, okay, I got Joey for his football game, and then Jada needs to be picked up from swimming, and if you can take Jimmy to the exorcism, and then we'll have dinner at 7. It was like that. It was just like part of our life. And we threw everything at it, every dollar, every minute.
Wow.
And it finally came down to the end where we had to relinquish our parental rights to him. Because the county was getting involved. We were going to lose control of the whole situation. And so the best thing that we could do for him was to let him be readopted into another family. And which meant we were never going to see him again or have any contact. And it was heartbreaking. It was embarrassing. It went against, here I am, a pastor, a dad, an advocate for adoption, and he's a twin. It's like everything, and it was prophetic that we adopted them as twins. Like how, and I felt like a failure. Like I can't get him spiritual relief either. And it came down, it was the day before he was going to leave our home, and he didn't know he was going to leave. And when he was alone with me, we'd have a great relationship, because when the demonic in him would come over him like he was under the influence of something.
Oh, wow.
But he as a person
was a great person.
A great boy, a charming little boy. He's created in God's image. He has a future, and we believe that, but he had this demonic influence in him. And I'm thinking it's like my last ditch effort to try and get him freedom. And leading up to this point, let me just say this. There were so many people giving us advice. Like the number one piece of advice we receive from people is, you should play worship music at night. And we're like, yeah, we do that. Like,
done that, tried that.
That doesn't work. That's not it. But people would say, like, you need to bury a stake with Bible verses on the north, south, and east part of your land, and then do a salt covenant and sprinkle. And you're like, I'd look at that and be like, this is like Christian witchcraft.
Yeah,
like that can't be.
That can't be the answer.
That can't be the answer. And then I kept thinking, where's the simplicity of the gospel? Like the power of Christ. Like, why can't? And so when I'm sitting with him that day before he's going to leave our home, and I'm like, Jimmy. And at this point, we like our terminology for the demons that he would invite in. I was like, are you still talking to the bad spirits? You're not going to get in trouble. Just tell me. He's like, yeah. And I said, you know that they're bad for you. And he's like, I know. And he's starting to get agitated. And I go, you know Jesus is good for you. And he's like, I know. I go, you know Jesus can set you free. He's like, I know. And I go, the bad spirits are going to harm you. And he would say, I know. And I go, we can pray right now to Jesus, and the bad spirits have to leave. And he's like, I know. And I'm waiting for him. And I go, do you want to do that, Jimmy? And he goes, no. Oh. And everything, because I was going to leave the ministry, to be honest. Because I thought, how can I stand in front of people and talk about hope and victory when I'm not seeing that in my own son? And everything came full circle at that moment, that there is a simplicity to the gospel that a child can receive or reject. And it's kind of like when Jesus went to the lame man at the pool of Bethesda, where he's like, do you want to get well? And we can look at that, like there's a choice and there's a question that we're all asked. And I was essentially asking him, like, because, and I say that to parents even who are praying for a prodigal son or daughter. Prayer makes a difference, but that child has a free will and a decision to make too. And you can't force that. You can't force it. I mean, and in his case, I believe 100% with all of my heart that if he wanted to surrender to Jesus, the demonic would leave and flee without the shadow of a doubt, that he would have freedom. But without him choosing that, even as a child, that's not going to happen. And so the next day he left our home, and we had it was a hard healing process because we couldn't be completely open. It was too hard and weird and awkward to explain all of this even to our church. You know, I couldn't stand up every Sunday and say, hey, our son is demon possessed and he's going through this, because the questions that would come and the advice, and and so when he left, you know, when a child passes away, there's a funeral, there's some closure, as painful it is, people kind of rally around, and you know how much time to take, and you know, it's tragic, it's hard. With this, it was like there wasn't like family or friends around. It was like nobody really knew what to say or do, and we didn't really, you know, we just kind of moved on. Like, and we had been doing so much therapy, so many appointments with him. The last thing we wanted to do for my wife and I was to schedule more appointments. So I threw myself into the ministry. I wanted to make up for lost time.
Wow. Because
I missed a lot. My church was very gracious to us. Because I had to, like, my wife would call weekly.
And at this point, you're a lead pastor.
I'm a lead. Yeah, I was lead pastor at Summit Church of St. Paul. And like, it felt like almost daily, but it would be a couple times a week she would call and be like, Jimmy's manifesting. And I'd have to like run out of a meeting and drive home. I mean, it was constant time away. So I felt bad about that. And once he was gone, I'm like, okay, I got to make up for lost time. And so I really we started a building program. We started plans to open a second campus, like all these things. And in hindsight, we really should have taken some time to heal as a family and as a married couple. We really should have. And we paid the price for it over that first year.
So as we're winding up here,
after
that, you moved down to Florida right? And then had an accident. And then there's a whole thing that's detailed in your book, and you shared about it at Emmanuel, and I'll put links to those messages. But you went through a lot. How have you persevered and not gone back to the drinking and not lost your faith through all of these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's staying focused on one day at a time and trusting Jesus in the moment. And, when I almost died in the car accident, it really put things into perspective for me about just knowing that this is not our home and that we're here on a mission, and that, like I said earlier, there's going to be trouble, there's going to be pain in this life, but we're overcomers. And, the crazy thing with everything that we've been through, I'll still, like, in the middle of the night, if I get up to go to the bathroom and I stub my toe, I still feel like the world is ending. And I'll still be like, why, Jesus? Why would you let this, it's like, you'd think that I would just be above all that. But it's like, pain is weird that way, where you're able to move on from that. And I think that, we would have lost our minds if it wasn't for Jesus and being able to continue to surrender to him, to stay focused. And really a big part of that is to share our story and let other people receive healing through maybe what we've been through and our experiences, and just keep pointing people to Jesus. And so that's not like a super complicated answer, but I think it's it's all relative too. I think some people will almost feel weird talking to us like it's a comparison or a contest. If it was a contest, we'd probably win a few of them, but
yours is worse, mine is worse.
Yeah. And it's like, well, no, I mean, what I would compare it to is like if a 3-year-old is working on their Legos, building a tower, and their older sister comes over and kicks it over, for them, that's devastating. Because in their short lifespan, that was like their life's work. And so it's all, whatever we're going through and there's disappointment, people don't need to be shy about that. Like, oh, this doesn't rise to the level of someone else. Well, you can still embrace that pain, give it to the Lord, find healing, work through that, and be able to move on. And he gives us grace. He gives us grace for whatever it is we're going through.
I remember my mentor gave me a book a long time ago, Unshakable by Carter Conlon. Or Conlon Carter, I can't remember which is his first name or whatever. But talking about how all the trials that we go through is really preparing us for eternity and for the end times. Like, there's going to be persecution and hard times for Christians. And it's like these trials can make us unshakable for those times. It's like a preparation. Like, it's God's grace to prepare us for what's coming. So, I mean, I don't know if that all sounds always hopeful, but, we know that trouble's coming, and God is proven, your faith has been proven by what you've been tested in. And so thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
Just one last tidbit of advice. What advice do you have for young shepherd-hearted leaders who are persevering through ministry? How would you help? What would you say to them to keep persevering? What kind of advice do you have?
I think one of the biggest things is to have an outside voice, a mentor, some kind of accountability. In knowing a lot of ministers, a lot of pastors, I think, because we're all going to go through different troubles. And it can even just be the stress of ministry, or just trying to navigate marriage and family and the busyness of church. And I've learned that we are very bad assessors of our own stress and capacity. And you need to have someone speaking into your life. Like the different things that we've gone through, if you would have asked me at any of those moments, I'd say, I'm not in shock. I'm fine. I've got this under control. And I needed at those times someone to say, hey, Joe, let me just tell you, you're in shock right now, and you would do well to take a step back and do this and just chill for a moment and get some help. Or maybe this isn't the time to take on this new venture that you're looking at in a very stressful time. And I think that anyone in ministry would benefit from that. In leadership, is to just have a voice, a trusted voice that you would give permission to say, hey, when I'm going through a difficult time, I want you to kind of speak on my behalf, like advocate for me, because I'm maybe not going to be able to see those things in my life at that time.
Well, such a good word of advice. Well, thank you so much. And Thank you for listening to the Shepherd Heart Leader podcast. We're so excited that you joined us today. What a powerful conversation with Reverend Joe Anderson. I feel really encouraged. I hope you do as well. Pick up his book, The Tension of Redemption. You can find it on Amazon. We'll leave a link to his ministry and to the book in the bio. And as always, keep leading well.